The abandoned barn stood like a broken promise against the Wyoming sunset. Inside, Sarah Brennan pressed her spine to the back wall, one hand covering the left side of her face, the other gripping a rusted horseshoe spike hard enough to draw blood. She'd learned to read footsteps the way some men read clouds. Heavy boots meant trouble. Light steps meant pity. Either way, she'd stop breathing until they passed. The shadows were kinder than daylight. Always had been. Outside, a saddle creaked. A horse blew. A man's voice, low and steady. "Easy now, girl." Sarah's prayer came silent. "Please don't look at me. Please don't look at me, please." The barn door scraped open. Lamplight cut across the floor like a blade, reaching for her corner. She pulled the tattered shawl tighter and turned her face to the wall, temple pressed against the rough wood. The footsteps stopped, then something she didn't expect. The lamp set down outside the doorway. "Not coming in," a man's voice. "Careful." "Ma'am, I'm going to set this lamp here and step back. You come out when you're ready." A pause. Wind through the gaps. Or don't. She stayed pressed to that wall for a long time after his footsteps retreated. The lamp sat just outside the barn door, steady and yellow. Past it, she could make out the shape of a man walking away. Not rushed, not slow, just walking, like he had all the time in the world and none of it mattered. Sarah's fingers ached around the spike. She loosened them, felt the blood come back hot and prickling. "I ain't asking who you are or what you're running from," he'd said. "Just thought you might be cold." She was. Cold clear through to the bone. Late August in Wyoming could fool you. Hot as hellfire by day, sharp as January once the sun dropped. She'd been shivering for 3 hours, waiting for the temperature or her fear to kill her, whichever came first. Through a gap in the barn slats, she watched him settle onto the porch of a shack 20 yards off. A match flared. Coffee smell drifted on the wind. He sat there like a man with nowhere to be, cup in his hands, face turned toward the darkening hills. Never once looked at the barn. Sarah's breath came easier, then harder. Because kindness, the real kind, the kind without hooks in it, was more dangerous than cruelty. Cruelty, you could predict. Kindness made you hope, and hope could gut you faster than any knife. She pulled the shawl tighter and watched him through the gaps. The stars came out, cold bit deeper. Her body decided for her before her mind did. Around midnight, her hand reached for the lamp. It shook so bad the light danced. She steadied it with both palms, took a breath that hurt going down, and stood. Her legs had gone stiff. She moved slow like a woman learning to walk again. At the barn door, she stopped. He was still there, still awake. A second lamp burned on the porch rail now, and he draped a blanket across his shoulders. His horse stood hip-shot in a pen nearby, dozing. The whole picture looked like something out of a life she'd stopped believing in 15 years back. Quiet, simple, no violence waiting in the wings. She watched him pour more coffee from a tin pot, watched him drink, watched him set the cup down careful, like it mattered. He never turned toward the barn. Kept his word about that. Sarah shifted her weight. A board creaked under her boot. His head came up, just slightly, but he didn't turn around. Just sat there, still as stone, giving her room to make her choice. She stepped out into the lamplight. The air hit her face, cold, clean, tasting of sage and dust. She kept the shawl pulled close, kept her scarred side angled away, and took 3 steps toward the porch. He stood, slow, hands loose at his sides. They looked at each other across 20 yards of hard Wyoming dirt. He was older than she'd expected. 50, maybe more. Gray in his beard and deep lines around his eyes. The kind that come from squinting at the sun for decades, not from laughter. His hands hung easy, scarred across the knuckles, one finger bent at an angle that said it had been broken and never set right. "Ma'am," he said. Just that. Nothing more. She nodded. Couldn't speak yet. Her throat had gone tight as a fist. He took a step back. Not away, just making space. Like she was something wild he didn't want to spook. "There's coffee," he said, gesturing to the pot. "And a blanket inside if you want it. Ain't much, but it's warm." Sarah's hand tightened on the shawl. She'd learned to read men the way sailors read weather, looking for the squall before it hit. But this one stood there calm as Sunday, not pressing, not expecting. "Why?" Her voice came out rough, barely louder than the wind. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "'Cause it's cold. And you're here. That's reason enough." The wind picked up then, sharp and sudden. It pulled at her shawl, tugged the fabric loose from her grip. For half a second, maybe less, the left side of her face caught the firelight. The scar ran temple to jaw, thick and ropey, pale against sun-dark skin. The kind of wound that told a story nobody wanted to hear. She saw his eyes find it, saw them widen, just slightly. Here it comes, she thought, the flinch, the polite turning away. The excuse about needing to check on the horses, or bank the fire, or any of the 100 ways men had learned to say "I can't look at you" without saying it out loud. But he didn't turn away. He removed his hat, pressed it to his chest, stood there with his head bare under the stars, looking at her like a man meeting someone he'd known a long time ago and thought he'd lost. His eyes filled. Sarah froze. She'd spent 15 years waiting for disgust, pity, fear, anything but this. But Eli Taggart stood there with tears tracking slow down his weathered face, and the look in his eyes wasn't horror, it was recognition. Like he saw something in her scar that matched something in him, something nobody else could see, something that didn't need explaining because he already understood. She waited for him to speak, to offer some empty comfort, some well-meaning lie about how it wasn't so bad, how she was still, "Ma'am," he said again, quiet, steady, that was all. Not miss, not girl, not poor thing. Just ma'am, the way a man addresses someone he respects. Someone worth standing bareheaded for under the Wyoming stars. Sarah's knees went weak. She'd traveled 8 territories in 15 years, and nobody, not one single soul, had called her ma'am since the day she got marked. The tears on his face caught the lamplight. He didn't wipe them away, didn't apologize for them. Just stood there, hat over his heart, looking at her like she was something worth weeping for, not out of pity, out of understanding. She took another step forward, then another, her own eyes burning now, hot and fierce. He waited, patient as stone, patient as time. When she reached the porch steps, he set his hat back on slow, gestured to the door. "Coffee's hot," he said, "and there's a chair by the fire." She climbed the steps, stood beside him for a moment, both of them looking out at the dark land. "What's your name?" she whispered. "Eli Taggart." "I'm—" She stopped, swallowed. "I'm nobody." "No, ma'am?" He looked at her then, really looked, scar and all. "I don't reckon that's true." He opened the door. Lamplight spilled out, warm and gold. She stepped inside. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. For 3 heartbeats, she didn't remember where she was. Then it came back. The barn, the lamplight, the man with tears on his face. She sat up fast, pulse hammering, and looked around. She was alone, in the shack. A blanket lay draped over her shoulders, rough wool smelling of cedar and thyme. She'd fallen asleep in the chair by the fire, and somebody had covered her while she slept. The thought made her skin crawl and settle all at once. Through the window, she saw him on the porch. Back to the door. 2 tin cups sat on the rail beside him, steam rising slow in the morning cold. He poured coffee into both, set the pot down. Then he walked away, not far, just to the corral where his horse stood waiting. Started brushing the mare down with long, easy strokes, giving Sarah space, giving her a choice. She stood. Her joints ached. The shawl slipped from her shoulders and she caught it, held it close, moved to the door, opened it a crack. The coffee cups sat there side by side, both chipped along the rim, steam curling up like prayers. She stepped out, took the cup farthest from the door. The tin was warm against her palms. She drank. It was strong enough to strip paint, sweetened with a touch of molasses. It tasted like something worth waking up for. Eli glanced over from the corral, nodded once, went back to brushing his horse. Sarah stood there on the porch, cup in hand, and watched the sun climb over the plains. The sky turned from gray to gold to blue, so sharp it hurt to look at. Wind moved through the sage. A hawk circled high and lazy. Nobody spoke. It was the most peaceful morning she'd had in 15 years. 3 days passed like that. She'd wake to coffee already poured. He'd nod. She'd nod back. Then they'd go about the business of living in quiet parallel. Him mending tack or fixing fence. Her sweeping the porch or shaking out blankets. Small tasks, simple ones, the kind that didn't require words. On the 4th morning, she found an apron hanging on a nail by the door. Faded blue, patched at the pocket. Clean. She looked at it for a long time, then put it on. That afternoon, she started cooking. Nothing fancy, beans and cornbread, fried salt pork. But when she set the plate in front of him at dusk, his face did something complicated. He bowed his head for a moment, like he was praying or remembering or both. "Much obliged," he said finally. She nodded, sat across from him. They ate in silence, forks scraping tin plates, the wind moving through the gaps in the walls. After, she washed the dishes in a basin outside. The water was cold, and her hands went numb, but she scrubbed each plate clean and stacked them careful. When she came back in, he had the fire built up and a second chair pulled close to it. She sat, wrapped her arms around herself. "You got a name?" he asked, not pushing, just offering the question like another cup of coffee, hers to take or leave. "Sarah. Sarah." He said it slow, like he was testing the weight of it. "That's a good name." She almost smiled. Didn't quite manage it. But something in her chest loosened, just slightly. He didn't ask for more. Didn't press about where she'd come from or why she'd been sleeping in his barn. Just poked at the fire and let the silence settle. Outside, the coyotes started up. Long, lonesome calls that echoed across the plains. Sarah tensed. Eli didn't move. They won't come close, he said. Not with the fire. She nodded, believed him, because in 3 days, he hadn't lied to her once, hadn't promised anything he didn't deliver. That was rare enough to be worth something. That night, she slept in the chair again. And again, she woke to find the cedar-smelling blanket tucked around her shoulders. On the 7th day, she went to fetch water from the creek. It was a clear morning, cold enough to see her breath. She picked her way down the bank, careful on the rocks, and filled the bucket slow. Her old shawl, the tattered gray one she'd been wearing for 5 years, hung loose around her shoulders. When she bent to lift the bucket, the shawl slipped, caught on a branch, tore clean through. Sarah stared at it. The fabric hung in 2 pieces, useless. She felt something crack inside her chest, not grief exactly, but the loss of the last thing she'd carried from her old life. Even if that life had been nothing but running. She pulled the pieces free, folded them, set them on a rock like a burial. When she came back up the bank, bucket sloshing, Eli was waiting on the porch. He had something in his hands, blue wool, folded neat. "Creek's cold this time of year," he said. Held out the shawl. Sarah stopped walking, stared at the wool. It was clean, carefully stored, the kind of thing a man keeps because it belonged to someone who mattered. "I can't," Anna'd want it used. His voice was steady, but something moved behind his eyes. Old grief, worn smooth. She was particular about waste. Hated seeing good things go to nothing. Sarah set the bucket down, reached out slow. Her fingers brushed the wool. It was soft, well-made, smelling of cedar and time and care. "Your wife?" "3 winters back. Fever took her." "I'm sorry." "Me too." He looked at the shawl, then at her. But she'd be glad to know it's keeping someone warm. That mattered to her, keeping folks warm. And Sarah took the shawl, unfolded it. It was big enough to wrap around her shoulders twice, heavy enough to cut the wind. She put it on. The weight of it felt like being held. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli nodded, picked up the bucket, carried it inside. Sarah stood there on the porch, wrapped in a dead woman's shawl, and felt something she hadn't felt in 15 years. Safe. That evening, they sat on the porch as the stars came out. Eli smoked his pipe, slow, contemplative. Sarah wrapped Anna's shawl tighter and watched the horizon darken. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of all the things they weren't saying yet. Finally, Eli spoke. "She was a good woman, Anna," and he paused. "Stubborn. Could out-argue a lawyer and out-stubborn a mule, but good." How long were you married?" 23 years. Sarah did the math. That meant he'd been alone for 3 winters. 3 years of waking up to empty chairs and cold coffee. 3 years of keeping a dead woman's shawl folded in cedar because letting it go felt like losing her twice. "She'd like you," Eli said quietly. "Anna." She had a soft spot for folks the world tried to break. Sarah's throat tightened. I ain't asking you to be anything, Sarah." He looked at her then, firelight catching the gray in his beard. "Just saying Anna would have set that extra cup out same as I did, maybe faster." The wind picked up, carried the smell of sage and distance. "Whatever you're running from," Eli said. "It ain't here, not yet." Sarah pulled the shawl tighter. Yet, he agreed. They sat in silence after that. The coyotes called, the stars wheeled overhead, and for the first time in 15 years, Sarah let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could stay in one place long enough to remember what stillness felt like. The fire burned low. Eli tapped out his pipe, rose slow, like a man whose bones remembered every year. "I'll bank the fire," he said. "You get some rest." She nodded, stood, looked at him in the dim light. "Eli?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for the shawl, for all of it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Ain't nothing to thank me for, just doing what's right." He went inside. Sarah stayed on the porch a moment longer, wrapped in Anna Taggart's shawl, looking out at the dark plains. Somewhere in the distance, a rider passed. She saw the silhouette against the stars, moving slow, purposeful. Watching, her chest tightened. Not yet, Eli had said. But yet was coming. She could feel it in the wind. 2 weeks in, Eli made the ride to Laramie for supplies. Sarah watched him saddle the mare from the porch. He moved careful, checking the cinch twice, running his hand along the horse's neck the way a man does when he's thinking about more than just leather and distance. "I'll be back before dark," he said. Didn't ask if she needed anything. Didn't suggest she come along. He knew better. She nodded. Pulled Anna's shawl closer, even though the morning wasn't cold yet. He swung up into the saddle, paused, looked down at her with something heavy in his eyes. "You'll be all right?" "I've been worse places than here." That seemed to satisfy him. He touched his hat brim and turned the mare east. Sarah watched until he disappeared into the sage and distance, then went back inside, swept the floor, washed the dishes, did all the small tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering into dark country. But the quiet felt different without him there, bigger. Like the walls had moved back and the world was pressing closer. She was boiling coffee when she heard it, hoofbeats, multiple, coming fast. Her hand went to the knife on her belt. Old instinct. She moved to the window, careful to stay back from the light. 3 riders passed on the road. They didn't stop, didn't even slow. But one of them turned his head as he went by, looking straight at the shack. Looking hard. Sarah's pulse hammered. She stepped away from the window and waited. The hoofbeats faded. The silence came back, but it felt different now, watchful. In town, Eli tied his mare outside Morrison's Mercantile and went in. The place smelled of flour and dry goods, and the particular staleness of a room that never got enough air. He nodded to Morrison behind the counter, started pulling items from the shelf: coffee, cornmeal, salt pork, a bag of beans. "Morning, Elijah." He turned. Cordelia Sykes stood 3 feet away, arms crossed, mouth set in that particular line women get when they've appointed themselves judge and jury over other people's business. "Mrs. Sykes? Haven't seen you in town much lately. Been busy." "I imagine so." She glanced at his supplies. "That's a lot of food for one man." Eli set the beans on the counter, met her eyes. "Reckon that's my concern, ma'am." "Is it?" She stepped closer, lowered her voice, but not by much. "People talk, Elijah, about the woman you're keeping out there." The Mercantile went quiet. Morrison stopped weighing flour. 2 other shoppers turned to watch. Eli's jaw tightened. "I ain't keeping anybody. She's a guest." "A guest with a face like that?" Mrs. Sykes' voice carried now, sharp as winter. "A woman marked by God knows what, hiding on your property. Decent folks got concerns. Then it's a good thing I ain't claiming to be decent." And he pulled coins from his pocket, set them on the counter, exact change, gathered his supplies, and walked out, spine straight, not looking back. But he could feel their eyes on him all the way to his horse. He was loading the saddlebags when Marshal Jed Pruitt stepped into the street. "Elijah, got a minute?" Eli kept working. "Depends what you're asking for." Pruitt shifted his weight. He was a decent man in most ways, fair with drunks, patient with bar fights. But he was also the kind who'd rather keep the peace than make it. Easier that way. "Look, I ain't here to cause trouble." "Then don't." "It's just..." Pruitt took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "People are talking about the woman. Some folks think she's... well, they got questions." Eli turned then, looked at him straight. "What kind of questions?" "The kind I don't want to be explaining to the territorial governor. If something happens." "Ain't nothing gonna happen." "You sure about that?" Pruitt's voice dropped. "A woman shows up scarred to hell, won't come to town, won't give her name. That ain't normal, Elijah. And normal's what keeps folks calm." "Maybe normal ain't worth keeping if it means turning out someone who needs help." Pruitt was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm asking you, friend to friend. Send her on before there's trouble. Before I got to make it official." "You asking or telling?" The marshal looked away first. "Asking. For now." Eli swung into the saddle. "Then my answer's no." And he rode out of town without looking back. But he could feel the weight of it settling on his shoulders. The town's judgment, the marshal's warning, the trouble that was coming, whether he invited it or not. She heard the horse before she saw him. Stood on the porch, watching him ride in through the late afternoon light. He looked tired, older than he had that morning. He dismounted slow, started unloading the saddlebags. "How was town?" "Same as always." But his voice had an edge to it. She knew that edge. Had heard it in her own voice for 15 years. The sound of a man carrying something he didn't want to set down. "Eli, it's nothing. Don't lie to me." He stopped, set the flour sack on the porch rail, looked at her with something raw in his eyes. "Folks talk. They're worried. About you. About me keeping you here." "What did they say?" "Don't matter." It does if they're coming after you because of me." "Ain't nobody coming after anybody." But she saw the lie in his face, saw the way his jaw worked, the way his hands tightened on the saddlebag. "I should go." "No." "Eli, I can't." "You can, and you will." He picked up the flour, carried it inside. She followed. "You don't understand what I bring with me." "I understand just fine." She grabbed his arm, made him look at her. "I ruin things. Everything I touch, I ruin. That's why I keep moving. That's why I don't stay." He set the flour down, turned to face her full. "You think you're the only one who's ruined something?" The words hung between them, heavy with meanings neither of them wanted to say out loud yet. Sarah's hands shook. She went to the chair, started gathering her things, the few clothes he'd given her, the knife, the small bundle that was all she owned in the world. She reached for Anna's shawl, folded it careful. Eli crossed the room in 3 strides, took the shawl from her hands, set it back on the chair. That stays, so do you. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. They stood there in the dim light of the shack, the air thick with all the words they weren't saying. Finally, Sarah sank into the chair. Eli moved to the stove, poured coffee into 2 cups, set one in front of her. The cup was chipped along the rim, same one she'd been using since that first morning. He sat across from her, picked up his own cup, just as chipped, just as worn. You see this? He tapped the crack with his bent finger. Dropped it 3 years ago, right after Anna died. Thought about throwing it out, getting a new one. Why didn't you? Because it still held coffee. Still did what it was made for. Crack didn't change that. He took a sip, set it down careful. Ain't about being perfect, Sarah. It's about still holding water. She stared at the cup in her hands, at the silver line, where someone, Eli, probably, had soldered the crack shut. The repair was visible, obvious, but the cup held. What if I can't? Can't what? Hold water. What if I'm too broken? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he held up his hands, scarred knuckles, bent fingers, rope burns that had never quite healed right. These hands ain't perfect, but they still work, still build, still hold things worth holding. And he looked at her then, steady and sure. Same's true for you. You don't know that. I know enough. Outside, the wind picked up, carried the smell of coming rain, rare for late summer, rarer still for Wyoming. The kind of rain that meant something was changing. Sarah looked at the cup, at the crack that had been mended, at the coffee that held, warm and steady despite everything. I bring trouble, Eli, everywhere I go. Then we'll face it. We, she wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was a fool for trusting a woman with blood on her hands and a scar on her face. But the way he looked at her, calm, certain, like he'd already made up his mind and no amount of her running would change it, stopped the words in her throat. She drank her coffee. It was bitter and strong and tasted like something worth staying for. That night, the rain came. Soft at first, then steady. It drummed on the tin roof and turned the dust to mud. Sarah lay in the chair by the fire, Anna's shawl wrapped around her shoulders, listening to the waterfall. Through the window, she saw a rider pass in the distance. Moving slow, watching. The rain kept falling, but it couldn't wash away what was coming. The rain stopped before dawn. Sarah woke to gray light and the smell of wet sage. Eli was already up, feeding the stove. He moved quiet, like a man who'd learned not to wake the ghosts. She sat up, the blanket slipped from her shoulders. She'd been dreaming about Montana, about her father's ranch, about dust and blood and a man's eyes going empty. The dream always ended the same way, her hands slick with it, unable to wash clean. Coffee's on, Eli said without turning around. She stood, moved to the basin, splashed cold water on her face, looked at herself in the small mirror hanging by the door, the scar catching morning light, the hollow look in her eyes. 15 years of running, and she still couldn't get ahead of what happened. Eli. He turned, saw something in her face that made him set down the poker. You want to know what kind of woman you're sheltering? Only if you want to tell me. She pulled the chair out, sat, gripped the edge of the table like it might float away. I killed the man who did this. She touched her scar. Killed him with a fireplace poker in my father's ranch house in Montana, 15 years ago, and I've been running it ever since. The words came out flat, factual, like she was reading someone else's story. Eli sat down across from her, poured coffee into both cups, pushed one toward her. Tell me, he said. So she did. His name was Dutch Carver. He had a claim east of ours, up near the Boulder River. Always wanted my father's water rights. We had the only reliable creek for 20 miles. Her hands wrapped around the cup. The warmth helped. Papa said no, offered to share the water, but not sell. Dutch didn't take that well. Started coming around when Papa was out checking fence. Started looking at me different. She took a breath. Kept going. One day, Papa didn't come home. I found him near the north pasture, shot in the back. Dutch's boot prints all over the mud. Eli's jaw tightened. He said nothing. Dutch showed up that night. Said he'd come to make an offer to the new owner, meaning me. Said a woman alone couldn't hold a ranch anyway, so I might as well sign it over. Make it easy on everyone. The memory came sharp, too sharp. She could still smell the whiskey on his breath, still see the way he'd smiled when she said no. He grabbed me. Said if I wouldn't sell, he'd take what he wanted another way. Said when he was done, I wouldn't be worth marrying off anyway, so the land would default to him through territorial law. Her voice stayed level. That was the trick. If you didn't let the emotion in, it couldn't drown you. I fought. He pulled a knife. I don't remember deciding to fight harder, just remember my hands finding the poker by the fireplace. Remember swinging. Remember him falling. Remember... She stopped, breathed. Remember him not getting up. The silence stretched. Rain dripped from the eaves outside. I buried Papa the next morning. Burned the house, took what I could carry and ran. Because I was 19, alone, and covered in a dead man's blood. No witnesses, no proof. Just me, a body, and a story nobody would believe. She touched her scar again. He got this in before he went down, said it'd mark me as used goods. Said no decent man would want a scarred woman. She laughed. Bitter, broken sound. Guess he was right about that part. Been hiding ever since. Eli was quiet for a long time. He turned his cup in his hands, watching the coffee move. How old did you say you were? 19. Then you didn't kill a man, Sarah. He looked up. His eyes were hard, certain. You survived one. She shook her head. I took a life. You defended yours. Ain't the same thing. The law don't see it that way. Then the law's a fool. He reached across the table. Stopped just short of touching her hand. Gave her the choice. She met him halfway. Their fingers touched. His hand was warm, rough with work and scars. You think God forgives something like that? She whispered. I think God understands the difference between murder and survival. And if he don't, then he ain't worth praying to. Sarah's throat tightened. She pulled her hand back, wrapped both arms around herself. You say that like you know. I do. Eli stood, moved to the window, looked out at the wet land, the gray sky. His shoulders carried weight she hadn't seen before. Powder River, winter of '65. I was scouting for a cavalry unit chasing Sioux raiders. We got separated from the main column in a blizzard. 3 soldiers, boys really, none of them over 20, looked to me to get them through. His voice went rough. We found a ravine, good cover, out of the wind. I said we'd wait out the storm, then move at first light. But the raiders found us first. 3 of them, maybe 4. I heard them coming, heard the horses, heard voices, and I froze. He turned. His face was carved from stone. Froze like a green recruit. Couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't warn the boys. By the time I came to, 2 were dead, and the 3rd was dying. Raiders were gone. Just me and 3 bodies in the snow. Eli, I got the 3rd boy back to the column. He lived 2 more days, then died of fever. The army called it bad luck, called me a hero for bringing him back. But I knew the truth, knew I'd hesitated when they needed me steady. He sat down again, looked at his hands. So you see, ma'am, I got no right to judge any soul who did what they had to. I know what it costs to survive when others don't. Know what it's like carrying that weight. Sarah stared at him, saw the guilt etched in every line of his face, carried in the set of his shoulders. 15 years apart, but they'd both been running from the same thing. The weight of choices made in bad moments, the weight of blood. So you think God forgives men like us? She asked again. Eli was quiet for a long time. Outside, a crow called. The wind moved through the sage. Don't know, he said finally, but I figure he understands, and maybe that's enough. They sat in silence after that. 2 people marked by different scars, carrying different ghosts, but sitting at the same table, drinking from the same chipped cups. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, just for a moment, long enough to paint the wet earth gold. Sarah looked at the light, at the way it caught the silver repair on her cup, at Eli's scarred hands resting on the table. I've never told anyone that story, she whispered. I'm glad you told me. Oh, why? Because carrying it alone is heavier. She nodded, felt something shift in her chest, not healing exactly, but the possibility of it. The first crack in the wall she'd built around herself, the light faded, the gray came back. But for a moment, they'd both seen the sun, and that was something. They came 3 days later. Sarah was in the garden plot behind the shack, turning soil with a borrowed spade. Eli had given her seeds, carrots, beans, squash, things that would take weeks to grow, things that required you to believe you'd still be there to harvest them. She was pressing the first bean into the earth when she heard the horses, 3 riders, coming straight up the path, not bothering to hide their purpose. Eli was at the corral. He heard them too. Set down the rope he'd been coiling and walked to the porch. Stood on the top step, arms loose, face calm. But Sarah saw the tension in his shoulders, saw the way his hand hung near his belt, where a gun would have been if he wore one. She stayed in the garden, dirt under her nails, watching. The rider stopped 20 feet from the porch. Marshal Pruitt in front, Mrs. Cordelia Sykes beside him, sitting her mare like a judge on a throne. A 3rd man, deputy maybe, or just someone who'd been deputized for the occasion, flanked them. Elijah, Pruitt said, not unkind, but formal, official. Marshal, we need to talk. Talking's free. Help yourself. Pruitt dismounted. Mrs. Sykes stayed mounted. Strategic high ground, the way queens survey battlefields. You know why we're here. Reckon I can guess. Mrs. Sykes cut in, voice sharp as January. That woman, Elijah, the one you're harboring, people have a right to know who's living among them. She ain't living among them, she's living here. Don't split hairs. Mrs. Sykes leaned forward in her saddle. A woman shows up scarred like that, won't give her name, won't show her face in town. That's suspicious. That's dangerous. Only thing dangerous here is your imagination, ma'am. Is it? Her eyes went hard. I've been asking around, Elijah, sending letters. And you know what I found? Dutch Carver, murdered 15 years back in Montana, and a missing woman named Sarah Brennan, who disappeared the same night. Woman with a scar just like the one on your guest. Sarah's hands went numb. The spade fell from her grip. Eli didn't move. That so? That's so. Mrs. Sykes's voice carried now. Meant for the deputy, meant for anyone listening. Which means you're harboring a murderer. Which means this town has every right to demand she face justice. What kind of justice you offering, Mrs. Sykes? The kind with a trial or the kind with a rope? The kind that keeps decent people safe. Marshal Pruitt held up a hand. Now hold on. But Sarah was already moving. She walked out of the garden, didn't run, didn't hide, just walked, slow and steady, until she stood at the base of the porch steps. Anna's shawl hung around her shoulders. Her scarred face caught the morning light, fully visible. She didn't turn away. You want the truth, Mrs. Sykes? The woman's mouth opened, closed. She hadn't expected this. Sarah climbed the steps, stood beside Eli, looked at all three of them, the marshal, the deputy, the woman who'd appointed herself moral guardian of the territory. My name is Sarah Brennan. I'm from Boulder River Country, Montana. And yes, I killed Dutch Carver 15 years ago. The deputy's hand moved toward his gun. Pruitt stopped him with a look. I killed him, Sarah continued, voice steady as stone, because he murdered my father over water rights. Because he came to my house that night and said he'd take what he wanted, whether I gave it or not. Because he put a knife to my face and told me no decent man would want me after he was done marking me. She touched her scar. Let them see it. Let them see her. So I fought. And when he wouldn't stop, I grabbed the fireplace poker and I swung until he couldn't hurt me anymore. Then I ran. Because I was 19, alone, and I knew nobody would believe a girl over a man. Not then. Maybe not now. Mrs. Sykes had gone pale. The deputy looked at the marshal. Pruitt was staring at Sarah like he was seeing her for the first time. So, yes, Sarah said. I took a life. I buried my father, burned my house, and I've been running ever since. 15 years of hiding. 15 years of believing I was exactly what Dutch said I was. Ruined, worthless, marked. Her voice cracked. Just slightly. She steadied it. If you came here to drag me to justice, then do it. But look at me first. Look at what I survived. And tell me to my face that I deserve to hang for defending my life. Silence. Wind through the sage. A horse stamped. Nervous. Marshal Pruitt cleared his throat. Dutch Carver. Yes. Something changed in his face. From Boulder River? Yes. He turned to Mrs. Sykes, then back to Sarah. Ma'am, do you know who Dutch Carver was? A murderer, a claim jumper. He was more than that. Pruitt pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. Dutch Carver had warrants out in 3 territories. Montana, Wyoming, Dakota, murder, robbery, assault. The territorial marshal's been looking for him for 7 years before that night. Sarah stared at him. The world tilted sideways. What? Dutch Carver, Pruitt said slowly, like he was reading from a wanted poster in his mind. Was wanted for killing a rancher and his 2 sons over a land dispute. He burned their house with them inside. That was in '61. After that, he disappeared into the territories. We figured he'd gone to California, or maybe Mexico. Never thought to look for him dead. He met Sarah's eyes. Miss Brennan, if you'd come forward back then, if you'd told anyone what happened, you wouldn't have been charged with murder. You'd have been a witness. Hell, there was a $200 reward on his head. You'd have collected it. The words didn't make sense. Sarah tried to process them, but they slipped through her mind like water through broken fingers. That can't... It's true. Pruitt's voice was gentle now, almost apologetic. I've got the old warrants back in my office. Been there since before I took the badge. Dutch Carver. 3 counts of murder, 1 count of arson, wanted dead or alive. But Sarah's voice broke. I killed him. You defended yourself against a wanted murderer. That ain't a crime, ma'am. That's survival. The deputy nodded. Even Mrs. Sykes had gone quiet, her righteous anger deflating like a punctured bladder. Sarah swayed. Eli caught her elbow, steadied her. You mean She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say it out loud, because saying it would make it real, and she couldn't bear the weight of what real meant. You've been running from ghosts, Pruitt said quietly, from fear and shame and a law that was never looking for you in the first place. 15 years. 15 years of hiding her face. 15 years of moving from town to town, job to job, never staying long enough to be seen. 15 years of believing Dutch Carver's last words, that she was marked, ruined, worthless, all of it for nothing. The sound that came out of her throat wasn't a sob, it was something deeper. Something that had been buried 15 years and was finally clawing its way to the surface. Sarah's knees buckled. Eli caught her, lowered her to sit on the porch step. She buried her face in her hands, not hiding now, just trying to hold herself together while everything she'd believed came apart. 15 years, she whispered. 15 years, The laugh came first. Bitter, broken, edged with something wild, then the tears, hot and fierce, not from sadness but from rage. Rage, at the time stolen. Rage at the life she could have lived. Rage at the man who'd marked her and made her believe the mark meant something. Eli knelt beside her, didn't speak, didn't offer empty comfort, just stayed close, his hand on her shoulder, steady as stone. Mrs. Sykes shifted in her saddle. Her voice, when it came, was smaller than before. I thought, you thought wrong. Eli's voice was quiet but carried weight. You came here with judgment and a rope. Now you know the truth. Question is, what are you going to do with it? Pruitt put his hat back on. Miss Brennan, you ain't wanted by any law I know of. You're free, always have been. Free, Sarah repeated. The word tasted strange, foreign, like something from a language she'd forgotten how to speak. The tears kept coming. She couldn't stop them. Didn't try, just sat there on Eli's porch, wrapped in a dead woman's shawl, crying for the girl she'd been at 19. The girl who'd fought and survived, and then spent 15 years believing survival meant guilt. The deputy looked uncomfortable. Pruitt gestured for him and Mrs. Sykes to mount up. We'll be going, Pruitt said. Sorry for the trouble, Miss Brennan, and he paused. For what it's worth, you did the right thing, back then and now. They rode away, 3 riders, disappearing into sage and distance. Sarah sat on the step, shoulders shaking, Eli beside her. The morning stretched long and quiet. A crow called. Wind moved through the grass. Finally, her breath steadied. The tears slowed. She wiped her face with the edge of the shawl, looked at Eli with red eyes. I wasted it, she said. All those years, I wasted them. You survived them, he said. That ain't waste, that's life. But I could've. Could've? Don't matter. His voice was firm, but kind. What matters is what you do now. She looked at him. At his scarred hands, his weathered face, the steady certainty in his eyes. Looked at the shack behind them, small, simple, solid. Looked at the garden plot, where she'd been planting beans that would take weeks to grow. I don't know how to not run, she whispered. Then we'll figure it out together. She nodded. Pulled the shawl tighter, let herself lean against his shoulder, just slightly, just enough to remember what it felt like to be held up by something other than her own stubborn will. They sat like that, while the sun climbed higher, while the land warmed, while the weight of 15 years slowly, incrementally began to lift. It didn't disappear. It would never disappear, but sitting there with Eli beside her, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt since she was 19 years old. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she could stop. Sarah walked to the creek alone. Eli let her go. Understood, maybe, that some things need sorting in solitude before they can be shared. She moved through the sage like a woman learning to walk in a body that didn't fit right anymore. The same legs, the same hands, but the weight distributed different. The creek ran low this time of year, more stone than water. She picked her way down the bank, found a flat rock in the shade, and sat, pulled her knees up, rested her scarred cheek on her arms and stared at the thin ribbon of water moving over smooth stones. 15 years. She kept turning the number over in her mind, trying to make it mean something different than it did. 15 harvests she could have planted. 15 winters she could have spent warm instead of running. 15 years of believing she was marked, ruined, unworthy of daylight. All because she'd been too scared to ask if what she believed was true. The water moved, patient, endless. It didn't care what she'd done or where she'd been, it just flowed. She touched her reflection in a still pool. The scar caught the light, temple to jaw, thick and permanent. Dutch Carver's last gift, his way of making sure she'd never forget him. But looking at it now, really looking, without the weight of shame pressing down, she saw something different. Not a mark of ruin, a mark of survival. You defended yourself against a wanted murderer, Pruitt had said. That ain't a crime, that's survival. She traced the scar with her fingertip, felt the raised tissue, the way it pulled when she moved. It had been part of her so long she'd forgotten what her face looked like before it, forgotten the girl she'd been at 19, strong enough to fight, brave enough to survive, young enough to believe the world would punish her for it. A hawk circled overhead. Its shadow passed across the water, then was gone. Sarah sat with herself for a long time. Let the creek sounds fill the empty spaces. Let the sun Move across the sky. Let the truth settle in her bones the way cold settles in winter. Slow, thorough, impossible to ignore. She'd been free. The whole time. Free. The weight of that was almost worse than the shame had been. Sarah was still at the creek when she heard the wagon. She stood, brushed the dust from her skirt, and made her way back up the bank. By the time she reached the shack, Doc Abigail Worth was already down from her wagon, medical bag in hand, deep in conversation with Eli on the porch. Heard about the excitement, Doc was saying. Figured I'd come by, check on things. Eli glanced toward Sarah. She's all right. That ain't for you to say, is it? Doc turned, saw Sarah approaching. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, took in everything. The tear-stained face, the set of Sarah's shoulders, the way she held herself like she was still figuring out how to stand. Miss Brennan, walk with me? It wasn't really a question. Doc Worth was the kind of woman who gave orders disguised as invitations, and wise folks learned early not to refuse. Sarah nodded. They walked toward the corral, slow and easy, while Eli stayed on the porch giving them space. So, Doc said, I hear you've been carrying a weight you didn't need to carry. Seems that way. And now you know the truth, that you were free all along, that the cage was in your head. Sarah's throat tightened. Yes, ma'am. Doc stopped walking, leaned against the corral fence. She was 60 if she was a day. Gray-haired, sharp-eyed, with hands that had set more bones and delivered more babies than any doctor in 3 territories. She'd earned her authority the hard way, and it showed. You see this? She pulled up her sleeve. A scar ran from wrist to elbow, thick, jagged, poorly healed. Confederate deserters. They didn't like me, tending Union wounded. Thought they'd teach me a lesson. She rolled her sleeve back down, gestured to her left leg. Got a limp from a horse kick. Moore didn't want to be shod, and I was too stubborn to wait for help. She tapped her temple. Got a scar here from a falling timber, and another on my back from a knife fight I didn't start, but damn sure finished. Yet she looked at Sarah directly. You think any of that makes me less of a doctor? Less of a woman? Less worth knowing? No, ma'am. Why, then, why the hell do you think your scar makes you less of anything? Sarah opened her mouth, closed it. The answer she'd carried for 15 years, because Dutch said so, because men turn away, because I'm marked, felt small and foolish in the face of Doc Worth's calm certainty. I spent 15 years believing I know what you believed, and I'm telling you, it was horse shit. Doc's voice was matter-of-fact, almost gentle. Child, I got scars from bullets and blades and every kind of stupid mistake a woman can make. You know what they mean? They mean I'm still breathing, that's all. The rest is just stories we tell ourselves when we're too tired to see straight. She reached out, touched Sarah's scarred cheek with weathered fingers, not flinching, not pitying, just touching, the way you'd touch any part of a person worth knowing. You're standing here. That means you won. That scar, that's your victory mark. Wear it like one. Sarah's eyes burned. People stare. Let 'em. Stares are boring. You're not. Doc Worth picked up her bag, started back toward the wagon, paused halfway. One more thing. The girl who swung that poker. She saved your life. You might consider thanking her instead of punishing her. She climbed into the wagon, clicked to the horses, and was gone before Sarah could find words to answer. Evening came soft and gold. Sarah found Eli on the porch, 2 tin cups already poured, steam rising slow into the cooling air. She sat beside him, not because she had to, because she wanted to. They watched the sun drop toward the horizon, painting the sage and stone in shades of copper and amber. A coyote called in the distance. Another answered. The evening song of the plains. Lonely, beautiful, timeless. Doc's a hard woman, Eli said after a while. She's right, though. Usually is. Drives folks crazy. Sarah wrapped her hands around the cup. Let the warmth seep into her palms. I don't know what to do now. Do about what? About being free. About not running. Eli was quiet, smoked his pipe. The tobacco smell drifted, sweet and earthy. My daddy used to train horses, he said finally. Had this one mare. Beautiful animal. Strong as anything. But she'd been beat before he got her. Couldn't stand to be touched. Would bolt at shadows. He paused. Watched the smoke curl. Took him 2 years. 2 years of just being near her. Not asking for nothing. Not forcing. Just showing her that not all hands hurt. Eventually she came around. Stopped running. Learned to trust. He looked at Sarah. Point is, you spent 15 years learning to run. Gonna take time to learn how to stand still. Ain't nothing wrong with that. Sarah nodded. Felt the truth of it settle in her chest. They sat in silence after that, drinking coffee, watching the light fade. 2 people learning, slowly, what it meant to stop running, together. Full dark came. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Sarah stood, thinking to go inside, when Eli spoke. You're free to go. You know that? She turned, looked at him in the darkness. You're free. Always were. Nobody's keeping you here. If you want to move on, see what's out there now that you don't have to hide, I'd understand. The offer hung between them, honest, without strings. Sarah looked out at the dark plains. At the horizon, she'd been running toward for 15 years. At the distance that had never been far enough. Then she looked at the shack. At the garden plot where beans were starting to push through the soil. At the corral, the porch, the place where someone had looked at her scar and wept not from pity but from recognition. What if I don't want to? Eli was quiet for a long moment, then soft. Then stay. Just like that? Just like that. She pulled Anna's shawl tighter, not hiding, just holding something warm. I don't know how long I can. That's all right. Neither do I. But we can figure it out as we go. The stars turned. The wind moved through the sage. And for the first time in 15 years, Sarah Brennan thought about planning something that would take more than one season to grow. She sat back down beside him. All right then, she said. I'll stay. All right then. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Two scarred souls, learning to believe that maybe, just maybe, staying was braver than running ever was. Sarah woke Sunday morning to the sound of Eli shaving. She sat up in the chair where she'd been sleeping. Would need to figure out better arrangements eventually, but that was a problem for another day. Through the open door, she watched him drag the straight razor careful along his jaw, squinting into the small mirror. You're getting cleaned up, she said. Sunday. You go to church? When I can. He rinsed the razor, dried his face, looked at her in the mirror's reflection. You're welcome to come, if you want. Her stomach tightened. Walking into town was one thing in theory. Doing it, standing in front of people who'd heard her story, who knew what she'd done, who'd spent their lives being told that women like her didn't deserve daylight, that was something else, entirely. I don't know if I can. That's all right. He hung the towel, turned to face her. But Sarah, hiding's gonna feel like running after a while. And you said you wanted to stop running. And he was right. She hated that he was right. She stood, looked down at herself, borrowed dress, worn boots, Anna's shawl. Not much, but clean, decent. Will they let me in? It's a church. They let me in, don't they? She almost smiled. That's different. Not as different as you think. 20 minutes later, they were riding toward Laramie. Sarah on the mare, Eli on the older gelding. The morning was clear and cool, sage smell thick on the wind. Her hands shook on the reins. She gripped tighter, trying to still them. Eli rode beside her, close enough to be present, far enough to give her space. As they crested the last rise before town, Sarah saw the church, white-clabbered, simple cross, people gathering in their Sunday best. Her throat closed up. I can't. You can. Eli's voice was steady. And I'll be right there. They dismounted at the hitching post. Sarah's legs felt like water. Eli offered his arm. She took it, not because she needed support, but because having something solid to hold on to made the walking easier. They climbed the church steps. The door opened. Conversation stopped. Sarah felt every eye turn toward her, felt the weight of judgment, curiosity, fear, all of it pressing down like a physical thing. Her instincts screamed to turn around, to run, to disappear back into the sage and shadows where she belonged. But Eli's arm was steady under her hand, and she'd promised herself she was done running. She kept walking. The aisle stretched long as a canyon, pews on either side, filled with townspeople dressed in their Sunday clothes. She saw Mrs. Sykes in the third row, stiff-backed, face unreadable, saw the shopkeeper Morrison and his wife, saw the deputy who'd ridden out with the marshal, saw faces she didn't know, all of them staring. Then, halfway down the left side, Doc Abigail Worth shifted over on her bench, patted the wood beside her. Sarah's breath caught. She looked at Eli. He nodded. They walked to Doc's pew. Sarah sat, pulled Anna's shawl close, not hiding now, but holding on to something familiar, something that reminded her she had a right to be here. The organ started. Reverend Micah Kearns took the pulpit. Kearns was a lean man in his 40s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen the inside of too many dark places to be fooled by surface shine. He'd been an outlaw once, bank robber, horse thief, the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about. Then he'd found God, or God had found him, and he'd traded his gun for a Bible. The congregation knew his story. It was part of why they let him preach, proof that redemption was real, that change was possible. He opened the good book, didn't read from it, just held it. There's a woman in this town, he began, who spent 15 years believing she was damned, believing that one night, one terrible, necessary night, had marked her forever as something less than human. The congregation shifted. Sarah's hands tightened on the shawl. Now, some of you know her story. Some of you came out to her home with questions and accusations. Some of you learned the truth, that this woman defended herself against a murderer, that she survived when she could have died. That she carried the weight of that survival alone for 15 years because she believed nobody would understand. He paused. Let the words settle. I used to rob banks. Did 7 years in territorial prison for it. Hurt people. Stole from families. When I got out, I thought I was done. Thought the mark of what I'd been would follow me till I died. His voice roughened. But this congregation let me stand here anyway. You knew what I was, and you let me try to become something different. That's called grace. He looked out over the pews. His eyes found Sarah. Question is, do you believe in grace enough to practice it twice? Silence. Heavy. Waiting. Miss Brennan, Kern said quietly, would you stand? Sarah's heart hammered. Every instinct screamed no, but Eli's hand found hers under the shawl. Squeezed once. Let go. She stood. Legs shaking, face exposed to the light coming through the windows. The congregation stared, some with curiosity, some with judgment, some with something that might have been compassion, if she was reading it right. Kearns nodded to her. Tell them. Sarah's mouth was dry as dust. She swallowed. Forced words past the tightness in her throat. My name is Sarah Brennan. I'm from Montana, and for 15 years I believed I was a murderer. Her voice cracked. She steadied it. The man who gave me this scar, she touched her face, killed my father. Came to take what he wanted from me. And when I fought back, when I survived, he told me I was ruined. Told me no decent person would want to look at me. Told me I'd spend my life marked as something shameful. She looked out at the faces watching her. Some were sympathetic, some were uncomfortable. Mrs. Sykes sat stone still, expressionless. I believed him. For 15 years I believed him. I hid my face. I moved from town to town. I made myself small and invisible because I thought being seen meant being condemned. Her hands trembled. She gripped them together. But the marshal told me the truth, that the man I killed was wanted, that I was never a criminal, that I'd been running from ghosts. She paused, let the silence stretch. I'm telling you this because maybe there's someone else here who's carrying something they don't need to carry. Maybe there's someone who believes they're ruined because someone told them so. Maybe there's someone who's been hiding because they think being broken means being worthless. Her eyes found a young woman in the back row, 20, maybe 22, pretty face marred by a bruise along her jaw. Her husband sat beside her, thick-shouldered, hard-eyed, the kind of man who believed his fists settled arguments. The young woman was staring at Sarah, really staring, like she was seeing something she'd been searching for. I'm here to say you're not ruined, Sarah continued, voice stronger now. You're not worthless. You're not damned. You survived. And surviving, that's not something to hide. That's something to stand up for. She sat down. The pew creaked. Her heart hammered so hard she thought the whole church could hear it. Silence stretched, long, uncomfortable. Then the young woman in the back row stood. The girl didn't say anything, just stood there, bruised jaw visible, hands clenched at her sides. Her husband grabbed her arm. She pulled free, walked out of the pew, down the aisle, past Mrs. Sykes, past the shopkeeper, past all the proper people in their proper clothes. She stopped beside Sarah's pew. Their eyes met. The girl nodded once, just once, then kept walking, out the door, into the sunlight. Her husband followed, face red with fury, but he followed. Sarah's eyes burned. She blinked hard, looked down at her hands. Reverend Kearns cleared his throat. I think that's testimony enough. Let's pray. The service continued. Hymns were sung. Prayers were offered. But something had shifted. Something subtle and powerful that you couldn't name but could feel, like the change in air pressure before a storm breaks. After, people filed out slow. Some nodded to Sarah as they passed, some didn't. But three women who'd been sitting separate, quiet, stopped at her pew. Thank you, one whispered. That was all. Then they were gone. The shopkeeper Morrison paused on his way out, cleared his throat. Miss Brennan, you're welcome in my store, any time. Thank you. Mrs. Sykes walked past without speaking. But she didn't spit, didn't sneer, just walked past, face closed, jaw tight. It was something. Outside, the sun was high and bright. Sarah stood on the church steps, Eli beside her, and looked at the town spread out below. Dusty streets, false front buildings, people going about their Sunday business. She'd walked into that church expecting condemnation, maybe deserving it, in the corner of her heart that still believed Dutch Carver's last words. But she'd walked out to sunlight, to nodding heads, to three women saying thank you, to one girl brave enough to stand. Dockworth joined them on the steps, lit her pipe, blew smoke toward the horizon. You did good, girl. I didn't do anything. You stood. That's more than most folks manage. Eli touched Sarah's elbow. Ready? She looked back at the church, at the white clapboard and simple cross, at the door she'd been terrified to walk through. Yeah, she said. I'm ready. They rode home through afternoon light, the horses moving easy, the wind carrying the smell of sage and distance. Sarah's hands were steady on the reins now. Her face turned toward the sun, scar visible, unbothered. Behind them, the town grew smaller, but for the first time in 15 years, she wasn't running from it. She was just riding home. Morning light came soft through the window. Sarah woke in the chair. Last time, she told herself. She needed to figure out proper sleeping arrangements, and found Eli already up, making coffee. She stood, stretched the stiffness from her shoulders, walked to the small mirror by the door. Her reflection looked back. The scar was still there, temple to jaw, permanent as carved stone. But the woman looking back seemed different. Or maybe she'd always been this woman and was only now learning to see her. She reached for Anna's shawl, draped it over her shoulders, not pulled tight around her face, not clutched like armor, just laid it across her shoulders the way you'd wear any shawl on a cool morning. Loose, comfortable, practical. She pulled her hair back, tied it with a strip of leather. The scar caught the morning light, fully visible. She looked at it for a long moment, then nodded to herself and turned away from the mirror. Eli glanced up as she came onto the porch. He stopped mid-pour, coffee pot suspended. Something moved across his face, recognition maybe, or relief. Morning. Morning. She took the cup he offered, stood beside him, looking out at the land. The sun was climbing, turning the sage and stone to gold. It's a good shawl, she said, shame to waste it hiding. Eli was quiet for a moment, then, Anna'd be glad it's being used right. You think? I know. They drank their coffee. The wind moved through the prairie grass. A hawk circled, hunting, and Sarah Brennan stood in full daylight with her face turned toward the sun, no longer counting the cost of being seen. After breakfast, Sarah walked out to the plot behind the shack where she'd been turning soil the day Mrs. Sykes came with her accusations. The beans had pushed through, green shoots, thin but determined. The carrots weren't up yet, but she knew they'd come. Things grew slow in this country. Had to be patient. Had to believe the ground would give back what you put in it. She knelt in the dirt, pulled a few weeds that had sprouted overnight. The soil was warm, crumbly, good for growing. She pressed her palms flat against it, feeling the weight of the earth, the potential in it. Thinking about expanding? She looked up. Eli stood at the corner of the shack, coil of wire fencing over his shoulder. Maybe, if that's all right. It's your garden. Your land. Our land. He said it casual, like it didn't mean anything, like it didn't change everything. If you're staying, might as well plant things that'll last more than a season. Her throat tightened. I'm staying. Then you'll need more space. He set down the fencing, started pacing out dimensions. Squash takes room. Pumpkins too if you want 'em. Maybe some melons. You like melons? Anna did. Sarah stood, brushed the dirt from her hands, looked at the plot, at the wire fencing, at Eli marking corners with small stones, at the future being measured out in fence posts and growing seasons. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. Do what? Stay in one place. Plant things that take time. Believe they'll still be here when they're ready. Eli straightened, looked at her across the marked ground. Nobody knows how at first, you just do it, one season at a time. He held out a packet of seeds, squash, the label said, written in faded ink. These were Anna's. She'd want 'em used. Sarah took the packet, held it like something precious. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just plant 'em. She knelt again, pressed the first seed into the earth, covered it careful, patted the soil down, one seed, then another. Small acts of faith, small bets on the future. Eli worked beside her, stringing fence to keep the rabbits out. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from two people who've learned they don't need words to fill every space. By noon, the plot was twice the size it had been. Seeds in the ground, fence strung, a future taking shape in dirt and wire and possibility. That evening, Sarah brought out the tin cups. Both of them, hers and Eli's, both chipped, both worn from years of use. She'd been thinking about them since that night when Eli had shown her the crack, since he'd said it's about still holding water. You got solder? She asked. Eli looked up from the harness he was mending. In the shed. Why? Want to fix these. He nodded toward the small outbuilding. Help yourself. She found the solder and the iron, heated it in the stove until it glowed dull red, worked careful, melting silver into the cracks, watching the metal flow and cool. It was delicate work. Needed patience. Needed steady hands. The first cup took 20 minutes. She held it to the light, checking for leaks. The solder line ran silver and clean. She filled it with water from the basin. Not a drop came through. Got it. Eli came to look, took the cup, tested the repair with his thumb. That's good work. My father taught me. Said a rancher who can't mend things won't keep a ranch long. Smart man. He was, and she fixed the second cup, then poured coffee into both. They sat on the porch as the sun dropped toward the horizon, drinking from mended cups, watching the day end. "You know what I realized?" Sarah said after a while. "What's that?" "These cups are better now. The solder's stronger than the original tin. They'll hold up longer in the spots that broke." Eli turned his cup in his hands, watching the silver line catch the last light. "Things that break can be mended stronger at the seams." "Someone told me that once." Must have been a smart man." She smiled. Real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. He was all right. They sat in comfortable silence. The sky turned from blue to purple to deep indigo. Stars came out one by one. "Eli?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for everything. For the lamp that first night. For Anna's shawl. For not turning away." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Ain't nothing to thank me for. You'd have done the same." "I don't know if I would have." "I do." The certainty in his voice made her throat tight. She sipped her coffee. Let the moment settle. 3 days later, a rider came up the path. Sarah tensed, old habit, but Eli shaded his eyes, looked, then relaxed. "It's the girl, from church." Sarah stood, watched the young woman ride closer. She was alone this time. No husband. She sat her horse careful, like someone who'd learned to move through the world without drawing attention. She stopped at the porch, dismounted slow. "Miss Brennan." "Sarah." The girl nodded. "My name's Beth. Beth Porter." "What can I do for you, Beth?" The girl's hands twisted in her skirt. "I want to learn. What you said in church, about not being broken, just because someone tells you so. I want to learn how to stand up." Sarah looked at her, at the fading bruise on her jaw, at the way she held herself, small, careful, like she expected the world to "What do you need? Can you teach me to shoot?" Eli raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Sarah thought about it, about the poker she'd swung at 19, about the 15 years of running, about the moment she'd decided to stop. "Yeah," she said, "I can teach you that." They set up cans on the fence rail. Sarah pulled the old rifle from the shack, Eli's spare, kept loaded for coyotes. She showed Beth how to hold it, how to breathe, how to let the fear pass through instead of letting it freeze you. "Don't aim for where he is," Sarah said quietly, standing behind her, steadying her grip. "Aim for where you need him not to be." Beth nodded. Her hands shook. She fired. Missed. Again. She fired again. The can jumped. Beth lowered the rifle. Looked at Sarah with something like hope in her eyes. Again? Again. They practiced until the sun was low. Beth's hands got steadier. Her breathing calmed. By the time she mounted up to leave, she sat her horse different, spine straighter, eyes forward. "Thank you," she said. "Come back next week." "I will." Beth rode away. Sarah watched her go, then turned to find Eli watching her. "What?" "Nothing." But he was almost smiling. "Just thinking Anna would have liked you." "Yeah?" "Yeah." That night, Sarah sat on the porch, wrapped in Anna's shawl, mended cup in hand, looking at the garden where things were growing in ground she'd planted herself. Looked at the fence Eli had built. Looked at the land stretching dark to the horizon. For the first time in 15 years, she thought about next spring, about the harvest, about the future she was building, one seed at a time. She was still scarred, still marked, but the mark didn't define her anymore. She was just Sarah, standing in the place she'd chosen to stand. And that was enough. Sarah burned the biscuits. Not just burned, turned them into small rounds of charcoal that could have been used for ammunition or building foundations. She stared at the smoking pan, at the black lumps that had been dough 20 minutes ago, and felt her face heat. Eli came in from feeding the horses, stopped, sniffed the air. "Something die in here?" The biscuits. He crossed to the stove, looked at the pan, looked at Sarah. His mouth twitched. "Well," he said carefully, "they're consistent. They're rocks. Rocks are useful, good for foundations." Despite herself, Sarah felt a smile trying to break through. "You saying my cooking's good for building on?" "I'm saying it's solid." He picked up one of the biscuits, weighed it in his palm. "Real solid. Could probably use these for fence posts." "You're not helping." "I'm trying." He set the biscuit down. It hit the table with a thunk. They both stared at it. Then Sarah laughed. Actual laugh. Not bitter, not broken. Just the sound of a woman who'd made terrible biscuits and could find humor in it. Eli grinned. "Anna was a terrible cook, too. Burned water once, I swear." "You can't burn water." She found a way. Woman could do anything if she set her mind to it, including things that shouldn't be possible. Sarah looked at him, at the fondness in his eyes when he talked about his dead wife, at the way he didn't hide his grief but didn't let it swallow him either. "Then I'm in good company." The best. He opened the door, tossed the biscuits outside for the crows. How about I make dinner tonight? You can watch, learn the secret. What's the secret? Don't burn it. She threw a dish rag at him. He caught it, still grinning. That evening, they ate beans and cornbread that Eli made while Sarah watched. It wasn't fancy, but it was edible. They sat across from each other at the small table, and when Sarah complained that his cornbread was too dry, he said, "Make it better next time then." And she realized with a start that he was assuming there would be a next time, and a time after that, a whole string of tomorrows stretching forward. The thought should have scared her. Instead, it felt like possibility. "When's the last time you rode?" Eli asked the next morning. Sarah looked at the mare, gentle brown thing with a white star on her forehead. 15 years, give or take. You used to ride? Grew up on a ranch. Was in the saddle before I could walk proper. Then you'll remember. She wanted to believe that, but 15 years was a long time. And she'd given up so many pieces of herself along the way. Riding felt like another thing she'd lost. Another skill that belonged to the girl she'd been before Dutch. Carver taught her what it meant to be afraid. Eli saddled the mare, checked the cinch twice, led her to the mounting block. She's gentle, won't bolt unless you give her reason. Sarah put her foot in the stirrup, hesitated. What if I fall? Then you fall. Ground's still there. So am I. She swung up. The mare shifted beneath her and Sarah's hands tightened on the reins. Her heart hammered. Everything in her screamed to get down, to get away, to not trust anything that could run. But Eli's hand was steady on the mare's neck, and his voice was calm when he said, "Where's Usath? She can feel your fear. Show her you're all right." Sarah breathed. The mare's ears swiveled back, listening. Sarah loosened her grip on the reins, clicked her tongue the way she'd learned at 8 years old. The mare walked forward. It was just walking, slow, careful circles around the corral, nothing fancy. But Sarah felt something unlock in her chest. Felt the rhythm of the horse beneath her, the way her body remembered how to move with it, felt the wind on her face and the sun on her shoulders, and the ground passing beneath her. I'm doing it. Never doubted. She circled again, then again. By the 4th pass, she was smiling. By the 6th, she nudged the mare into a trot. The mare obliged, and Sarah posted in the saddle like she'd never stopped, like the 15 years had just been waiting for her to remember. When she finally stopped, breathless and grinning, Eli was leaning on the fence rail watching. Feel good? Feels like flying. Then we'll ride out tomorrow, show you the property line. I'd like that. She dismounted. The mare nuzzled her shoulder, looking for treats. Sarah scratched behind her ears, feeling the warmth of the animal. The simple trust in the way the horse leaned into her touch. "Thank you," she said to Eli. "For what?" "For reminding me I used to be good at things." "You're still good at things. Just been a while since you let yourself remember." Doc Worth came by later that week with some liniment for Eli's bad shoulder, old injury from his cavalry days that acted up when the weather turned. She found Sarah in the garden, tending the bean plants that were already climbing the stakes Eli had set. "Plants look good," Doc said. "They're coming along." "So are you." Sarah looked up. Doc was watching her with those sharp, knowing eyes that missed nothing. "Ma'am, you stand taller. Did you notice?" Sarah straightened self-consciously. "Same height I always was." "No," Doc shook her head. "You're not. You're growing into yourself, girl. It's a good look." Sarah touched her scar, old habit. But this time it wasn't shame, just acknowledgement. "I'm trying." "Trying's all any of us do." Doc handed her a small jar. "Salve, for rope burns and cracked hands. You'll need it if you're planning to keep ranching." "I'm not—" Sarah stopped, looked at the garden, at the house, at Eli, walking back from checking the fence line. "Am I ranching?" "You're planting. You're mending. You're teaching that Porter girl to shoot straight." Doc smiled, rare and genuine. "That's ranching, child. The rest is just details." She climbed back into her wagon. "Come by town sometime. We'll have coffee. I'll introduce you to some folks worth knowing." "I might do that." "I know you will." Doc clicked to her horses and rolled away, leaving Sarah standing in the garden with dirt under her nails and possibility in her chest. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. Sarah had her mended cup. Eli had his. The coffee was hot and bitter and perfect. "Eli?" "Yeah?" "I've been thinking." "Dangerous habit." She smiled. "About my father's ranch. About the land. It's probably been claimed by now, after all this time. But maybe I could write to the territorial office. See what happened to it." He was quiet for a moment. "You thinking about going back?" "No," she said it firm. "Sure. But I'm thinking maybe I don't have to run from it anymore either. Maybe I can just, no. Close that door proper instead of leaving it hanging open." "That's wise." You think so? I do. She sipped her coffee. Doc says I'm ranching. You are. Didn't plan on that. Plans change. They do. A coyote called in the distance. Another answered, the evening song of the plains. Sarah? Yeah? I'm glad you stayed. Her throat tightened. She looked at him in the starlight, weathered face, scarred hands, steady eyes that had seen her at her worst and stayed anyway. Me too. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running and let yourself be found. The stars wheeled overhead, the wind moved through the sage, and Sarah Brennan, scarred, mended, free, let herself believe in tomorrow.